Good afternoon and welcome to the second session of Ducks in a Row. Today is Funeral Options 2.0. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. People's Memorial Association would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Coast Salish, Duwamish, and Suquamish nations on which we work and live. A couple of housekeeping items that I'm sure you're familiar with. I'm going to go ahead and keep all of our participants on mute today, but I hope that doesn't discourage you from being an active participant. You can go ahead and drop any questions or concerns into the chat. I know last time we had a couple of technical issues with the chat, so if you find that it's not working so well for you, please feel free to use the Q&A feature. And you can also use that as a way to keep your identity secret if you have any sensitive questions. Don't worry about scrambling to jot down all your notes. We will be recording today's presentation and I'll be sharing the recording in a follow-up email as well as including the slides and a number of materials for you to review later on. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. My name's Beverly and I'm the Communications Manager for People's Memorial Association. We're the oldest and largest memorial society in the United States, and we were founded back in 1939 right here in Seattle. We provide funeral education and consumer advocacy services to all Washingtonians. And to date, over 217,000 folks have joined. And of those folks, about 71,000 of them are still living. So as you might imagine, we stay incredibly busy in the office. When we think about what we do to support those folks, well, education is one of the biggest things. We offer free classes like this and host an incredible bevy of resources on our website and our Facebook and our Instagram. And one of these days, I'm going to figure out how to use Twitter and TikTok, and we'll be there too. In addition to those educational resources, we work really hard to support our state level legislature in advocating for an increase in funeral choice, an increase in price transparency, and protecting cultural rights. Here in Washington, we are blessed to have an incredible diversity of folks from all different backgrounds, whether they be religious, spiritual, ethnic, social groups. And all of those folks, they deserve equal access to affordable cremation, burial, aquamation, and natural organic reduction, as well as the meaningful practices that go along with grieving and celebrating the life of someone you've lost. And like I mentioned, today is the second session in a series called Ducks in a Row. We have one more session after this. Next week, we'll be talking about estate planning. And I know a lot of times people hear that term and they think, gosh, I'm not wealthy by any means. I don't have an estate at all. But I would encourage you to open your mind a little bit and consider attending anyway. It can be a really valuable resource, even if you have modest resources or, I have an English degree, I can say it. I don't have much of an estate, but what I do have, I want to make sure I plan for. So this can be a really useful resource. And like I said, it is free. Last week, we did talk about advanced care directives for healthcare. And if you'd like that recording, please reach out to us at PMA or reach out to Emily and she can connect you up with us. You can access that recording for free. Now, I would like to turn it over to Emily, who is joining us from the Seattle Public Library. Thank you so much, Emily. It's a delight to see you again.
Yes, Beverly, it's great to see you too. Hello, everyone. My name is Emily, and I just want to welcome you all here. I am the Older Adult Program Manager here at the Seattle Public Library, and I help to create and run programming for the 50-plus audience and advise the library on how to be best age-friendly and more inclusive for all. If you ever have any suggestions, comments, or feedback, my information will be posted in the chat in just a few minutes, and I welcome you to reach out. We have some exciting programming happening in November alongside this series. We offer a civic coffee hour. This month is going to be on the 17th, and it will be at the High Point Neighborhood House. This month's discussion is about winterization and remaining physically active and socially engaged in the winter months. So we will also be interpreting that live into Vietnamese, Somali, and Oromo. Like I said, I'll post a little bit more information on that. We're still holding twice weekly silver clay art classes virtually, and that happens on both Saturdays and Mondays. We are just wrapping up our fall business library to business series. So the next two are going to be our marketing basics class and our thinking with data class. And those are presented in English and then interpreted into Spanish and Vietnamese. And last but not least, the first week in December, we have a Preventing Medicare Fraud and Abuse presentation with SHIBA, which is the state Medicare health license organization with solid ground, and we will be doing a free hybrid presentation to look at common scams and how to avoid them, and that's on December 6th at 11 a.m. here at Central or on Zoom. And I will actually enter all this information into the chat. And if you have any other questions, you can always reach out to us at spl.org, or you can give us a call. Our phone number is 206-386-4636. Yeah, and thank you so much, and take it away, Beverly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Emily. I really would encourage anyone that's attending today to take a look at that programming. It can be a great way to break your day up and increase your knowledge base on something you might be curious about. Well, normally we host a subject matter expert from a different organization, but today you're just stuck with me. Again, I'm the communications manager for People's Memorial Association, and I know a lot about funeral options after, gosh, I think I'm starting my 5th year at PMA pretty soon here, and we actually do have a co-op funeral home associated with the organization, and I have learned an awful lot about funerals here in Washington, and I would love to share that information with you. I imagine you just have tons of questions because it's so hard to find reliable information online from someone who's not trying to sell you something. And that's one of the reasons I gave you that introduction to our organization off the top, so that you understand we don't have a vested interest in any of your decisions. So please don't be shy with your questions, but I'm going to wait to tackle them until the end of the conversation, because I've structured this specifically with the most common questions that I get in mind. So just be patient with me, and I promise I will just flood you with really valuable information. And if there's any lingering questions you have, or you maybe have a more personal situation and you don't feel comfortable bringing it up in a shared space, you can always reach out to us at People's Memorial Association, and we'll make sure you have that contact information so that none of those lingering questions become a problem for you. So, Funeral Options 2.0. I got to start with kind of a controversial statement. Death is not an emergency. Here in the United States, we've been really acculturated to feel a lot of taboos around the subject of death, and it's really become a little different. I think things have really changed because of COVID, and I hope that this is going to help the discussion keep going. You know, we've grown up thinking like, oh gosh, when someone dies, I gotta go, get them out of the house, get them to the funeral home, make the decisions, make everything happen, and there's certainly some value in that if you feel that resonates with your values, but I'm hoping today that we're going to learn that you have the time to make informed choices that actually reflect what's important to you, and hopefully you don't feel too rushed when the time comes. Hopefully you feel empowered to advocate for your needs. So one of the most important things to understand is, what is the role of a funeral home when it comes to death care? And I think it's so important to remember that at the end of the day, the funeral director works for you. This is all about what you and your loved ones need. The funeral director is just there to make that happen. So it's really important that when you are making arrangements, that you select a funeral home and partnering businesses that offer what you want at a price that's within your family budget. It's really easy to spend far more money than maybe you anticipated, or maybe you even wanted or can afford, just by trying to honor someone you love. So when you think about what the funeral home is doing to support you and your family through this process, well, one of the fundamental things is the handling of the body after a person has died. You know, they're going to arrange for the person's body to be picked up from their place of death and transported to a care facility where they'll be stored safely until either cremation takes place or burial, or a couple of other options we'll talk about later. One interesting thing is, here in Washington, you actually are not required to work with a funeral home. It can be really helpful, since obviously these are the folks that they do death every day. So they know all the things, they know how to handle the mountain of paperwork that can sometimes come along with this process, like filing for death certificates, or, you know, burial transit permits, or different authorizations. But you really get to control how involved those folks are. For a lot of families, this dynamic works just fine. You know, you hand everything over to the funeral home, and that works really well. But one thing we've noticed, I think due to COVID, is that people are more interested in being more involved than they have in the past. And there's a lot of really good opportunity for you to have meaningful interactions in the process, and maybe take control of things you might not have considered in the past. So one of the most essential questions is understanding who's the decider. When a death takes place, who is it that can make the arrangements? Well, here in Washington, I got this graphic right here from My co-presenter is causing some problems. Excuse me, ma'am. Honoring Choices Pacific Northwest has created this flow chart to help you understand who the state considers your next of kin. So if you don't put in writing who you want to run point on your care, this is the flow chart that they're going to use to determine who's responsible for you. So don't worry about jotting this down. Again, you'll have copies of my slides later on to refer back to. One question we get pretty frequently is, gosh, what if I don't have any family? Or what if, no one knows how to contact them? What happens? Well, if a next of kin isn't identified or is unable to claim the person's body and take responsibility for their care, that person's going to stay in refrigerated storage for 90 days. And then depending, on where their body is, that's the decision-making time. And this policy is generally in writing, very visible about, if a medical examiner has custody of the body or a funeral home does, they'll have a policy for how they move forward. Generally 90 days is enough time for this whole process to kind of get moving. If you do need more time, certainly communicate about it. And it wouldn't have been the first time that unusual circumstances have arisen and they've needed to accommodate someone. So if you get nothing else out of this presentation, if you go make a cup of coffee and get sidetracked and wander off, I won't be offended. I just really want you to know about these two documents. They're really important. These are legal documents and they are free and available on our website. I'll make sure also that you have copies of them in the follow-up email. I'm going to make a note right now to go ahead and send these over to you. They're so important. This is how you put your wishes down in writing and you make it crystal clear for your loved ones what it is that you want or don't want. So the form on the left is called a designated agent. And a lot of times when I talk to families about death care, they say, I'm not worried about it. My power of attorney is going to handle everything. But the thing is, in Washington, power of attorney expires at death. So even if you have someone that you've appointed that you trust, that you know is going to represent your interests, they won't be legally empowered to actually take charge. For a lot of folks, whoever the state decides your next of kin is just fine. If you're thinking, my husband knows what I want and I'm sure he's going to respect it, then you don't really need to worry about this. But there's a couple situations in which you might find a designated agent is a really useful form to fill out. Because like I said, it's a POA for your death care. Maybe if you separated from your spouse, but you're not legally divorced, so you don't really want them making decisions, but the state might assume that's the person. This is also a really good tool if maybe you want someone outside of your family to handle your care. This comes up a lot when maybe you're estranged from your family, or maybe your kids live overseas, or maybe your next of kin is in jail, or maybe, I don't know, like in my case, there's a pretty big, I imagine the state's going to consider my parents my next of kin. And I imagine if I predecease my parents, they're going to have some feelings about that. So for my own plans, I have designated my agent to be my best friend. So that way, in the event that I die before my parents, they can focus on the grief and the emotional process. And I have this other person who is well informed on what my wishes are, who knows what to do. We've talked through the plan, and that's the person that handles all the paperwork and deals with all that. As a bonus, I've also made her a beneficiary on my life insurance so she can get therapy later in case she needs it. But, this is a really good option. Maybe you're a different religion than your family, or, sometimes this comes up in LGBTQ persons. They think, my family's not going to respect my actual gender identity, or, they're not going to respect the fact that I want my partner to handle these things. So this is a great way to get that down in writing. On the right-hand side is a disposition authorization. This form is great. You can write down in as granular of detail as you want, or as broad of detail as you want, what you want to happen to your body. If you have a vision, and you always have, I want these particular flowers, and I want this particular chapel, and, don't let this particular aunt come. She knows what she did. You can write all those details on here to make it crystal clear to your family what it is they should do when the time comes. I do talk to a lot of folks who say, gosh, I just don't care. I don't believe in this, or I don't believe in that. I just want things to be simple. I don't want people to spend a lot of money or make a big fuss. And this is a great way to write that down. You could say, check in with this person, they know where I want my ashes to end up. Or, this is a great way on there. You can see, you can indicate if you've purchased a plot already, or if there's money set aside for things. So I just would really encourage you to fill out both of these forms. There's a lot of options on here for you to kind of create plan Bs as well. And I would encourage that as well, just because it's such an easy way to answer a lot of complicated questions for the people you love. And I will be including a copy of this for you again. So here in Washington, we've got 5 legal options for what you can do with a body. And I inherited this slideshow from a previous executive director who had a penchant for these corny cartoons. So I hope you'll stick with me on them. I think they're really charming. So here in Washington, you can be cremated, you can be buried, you can of course donate your body to science, but we also have 2 newer legal options here. We've got alkaline hydrolysis and natural organic reduction. And I'll talk a little bit about those options as well, so you can see if maybe those are a good fit for you. So here at PMA, one of the big projects that we're known for, and we've been doing for decades, is a statewide price survey. So these numbers are hot off the presses. We finished the survey about 2 weeks ago. So we contacted every funeral home in Washington to find out what their costs are. It can be, if you've ever planned a funeral or you've tried to learn more about this, it can sometimes be a little challenging to get this information out of a funeral home. So hopefully this will save you some phone calls. We found that the average cost of a cremation in Washington is over $1,600. Man, sometimes that is the motivation I need to get out of bed and go to work in the morning, is I am too poor to die. It is very expensive to even pay for the most streamlined, simple death care options. And one thing that was really striking about it is, we surveyed over 200 funeral homes. Depending on which funeral home you choose, this price can be wildly different. There's a 770% variation in cost here. So you can expect to spend as little as $500 or as much as multiple thousands of dollars. And it just depends on which funeral home you choose. The same service can cost way different at different businesses. Another really common, sort of simple option that people like to opt for is a direct burial. And that's just when you're buried, but without, embalming or a graveside service or a big funeral. You just want a simple burial. Even that is going to cost you over $3,000. And one of the things we did find is that, we do this price survey every other year. So the last time we did it was in 2020. And we found that over 70% of funeral homes increased their prices. We're not too surprised by that, but it's a little disappointing. So here is kind of a couple of interesting pieces of information I think that you'll be curious to know about. About 80% of Washingtonians choose cremation. We have one of the highest rates in the country. The national rate is somewhere between like 52 and 56%. And one of the most common reasons I hear from people about why they choose cremation is, of course, it's the most affordable option. We love that. But also, here in the Pacific Northwest, it's sort of the mecca for us irredeemable tree huggers. I count myself among those folks. And for a long time, this was the most environmentally friendly death care option out there. And so for a lot of people, that really resonated with them. I've included some photos here of some merchandise, just different varieties of things. I think a lot of times I find that families are a little bit surprised to see, I don't know if death care has changed necessarily, but there's just a lot more options than there used to be, and those options are more visible. So you can see right here, there's a pretty wide range in the different kinds of urns you can select for ashes. Here's the 4 most common things that people ask me about with respect to cremation. The first thing is, yes, families and religious communities can witness the cremation. To clarify, you're not going to see anything gross. When we talk about a witness cremation, it just means that your family can be there when your body is placed into the machine for the cremation to take place. And for some folks, their religion dictates that you're the last person, a certain person in your family is the last person that touches your body. And so this is a really powerful way to continue that tradition while using a more modern death care option. And if it's important to you, you can be the person that presses the button so that the body goes in. This is a really wonderful and meaningful option for folks. A lot of times people are curious, like, what happens? How long does it take? Well, it takes about 4 to 6 hours, depending on the individual. It depends on their body. And, one of the things is that sometimes people think of cremation as being sort of removed from tradition or meaningful emotional engagement. But a really beautiful thing that is an option is that you can place meaningful items with your loved one. There's some limitations, of course, based on the machinery. You can't put anything that's glass or with batteries in there. I guess one of the things that happened around the turn of the century is, right at the millennium, it was such a status symbol for folks to have cell phones that, wealthy folks wanted to be cremated with their cell phones, as a sign of how important and modern they were. But, the lithium batteries can damage the machinery. but things like letters and photos and your favorite book or your favorite hat or your grandmother's quilt, a teddy bear, all of those things, they can be cremated with your loved ones. So it can be a really wonderful way to build more ceremony into this process. And the number one question we get about cremation, I look at our website analytics every month, and this is always the thing that drives the most folks to our website. There's no value in getting gold fillings out of someone. The gold that used to be used in dental fillings isn't pure gold. Pure gold is very soft. So in order to be tough enough to be in your mouth and part of your teeth, the gold that was used is an amalgam. It's a mixture of different types of metals that toughens it up a little bit. So when a cremation takes place, that metal breaks down just like the rest of your body parts. And so it burns up and it turns into this like crusty little black nugget that's not recognizable because there's very little gold in it. Sometimes folks try to, work around the process and say, okay, well, what if I took the teeth out in advance? If that's important to you, then absolutely that can be arranged. But you should know that state law requires that this process be done by a dentist. It can't be done by anyone else. And understandably so, there's not a lot of dentists that really want to be involved in this kind of thing. So you have to hire a forensic odontologist in order to do that extraction. And that can be really spendy. So I think it's just important to know that there's not a lot of money to be made off of this. If there's a meaningful emotional or spiritual reason that you want it, arrangements can be made, but this can be a very costly process. So lots of folks decide to scatter ashes, and it's a really wonderful option. You can scatter them on land. We here in Washington have some rules about this. And if you really want to kind of dig into the nitty gritty of these rules, we've got them all published on our website. But the kind of highlights are, you can do what you want in terms of burying or scattering ashes on your own land. It's important to make sure, though, if it's someone else's land, that you get permission of this landowner. One of the things that I hear about really frequently is lots of folks have really strong emotional ties to Disneyland, and they want to have their ashes scattered there. And Disneyland does not want you to do that because, of course, they have to clean the ashes up. They'll have to shut rides down or close off certain parts of the park to do that cleaning. You need to have permission of the landowner to scatter anywhere that doesn't belong to you. You can scatter in national and state park lands, but it's best to contact the park rangers or depending on who owns the property, it might be the Department of Natural Resources, or it might be, the EPA might oversee that particular area. And they can give you some guidelines about where is best to scatter or if there's any limitations on it. Especially here in the Pacific Northwest, people love to do water scatterings, and that's absolutely an option. You can scatter on any navigable waterway. And I heard recently that this process might have changed a little bit, but the Washington State ferry system has a really wonderful system in place for this. If you let them know in advance that you're going to do a scattering off of a ferry, they'll actually stop the ferry, they'll make an announcement, they'll sound the horn. You can do the scattering, and there's a moment of silence. And the last time I went to one, they even issued certificates with the GPS coordinates of where you did the scattering, so you can visit the exact spot if you want, which I think is a really wonderful option. There's an item there on the bottom. This is actually a type of urn. And one thing that people ask about when they do scatterings is that they're a little bit squeamish about touching the ashes. It's perfectly safe, but understandably, it's not for everybody. This type of urn can be a great option if you want to do a scattering, but you don't want to touch the ashes. This is handmade paper. And, if you're going to scatter into the water, you would place the entire urn in the water, and the urn slowly takes water on and sinks in. So this is a great option. A lot of times people are concerned about wind. This can be a really great way to do a scattering, very safe, very clean, with little potential for dramatic wind changes. Okay, so I thought I'd sneak in one of those newer options just in case you were curious. So alkaline hydrolysis, you might have heard this called a couple of other things, maybe water cremation or aquamation. Some folks call it green cremation or dissolution. Here's an image of what that machine looks like. I think one of the really interesting things about it is that on the front is actually a submarine door. That's how tight that seal is. So when people are thinking like water cremation, how on earth? Well, this process is really interesting. By using a combination of high pressure water, and that water is warm but not hot, and also a little bit of alkaline chemicals depending on the weight of your body. those factors kind of work together to accelerate your natural decomposition. So here's a diagram to kind of wrap your mind around it. So this is what the machine looks like when you kind of pull the pieces apart, and kind of a mock-up of what it looks like when there's a person inside. And one of the things that I find that really resonates with people about this process is that when they think about a flame-based cremation, the process strikes them sometimes as a little bit violent. But there's something about water that people find very, very soothing, and the option of kind of returning back to water has a really big spiritual significance to a lot of folks. So this can be a really beautiful option. In terms of kind of what happens, well, you get back ashes that are very similar to cremated remains. They look a little bit lighter in color. They're more powdery than standard cremated remains, which can be a little bit darker because of the carbon in them. And they're a little bit grittier, like sand or like kitty litter, I suppose. If you'll humor me, I have a photo. It's not gross or anything. So on the left-hand side, this is a traditional cremated ash, while on the right-hand side is the remains after an alkaline hydrolysis. So you can see the color's a little bit different and the texture's a little bit different, but you can do all the same things with aquamated remains that you can with cremated remains. So you can do a scattering, you can bury the ashes. There's a bunch of really interesting novelty products out there, like, you know, you can get your cremated remains pressed into an album or made into a diamond. You could do all that stuff with aquamated remains as well. So something to consider, I suppose.
Beverly, we do have a question really quickly if you wanted to take it.
Sure. What's it about?
It's someone has their hand raised, so I'm going to allow them to talk.
Okay.
I believe that's how we're doing questions this time, or did you want someone to ask it through the Q&A?
Oh, I was hoping to hold the questions until the end if possible, unless
Okay.
it's something urgent, like, I don't know, the microphone's not working.
Yeah. If the person, Kathy, if you would just either answer through a Q&A or we can actually do it later at the end. Thank you.
Okay, great. So, so people are kind of curious, you know, those remains, is it safe? You know, when we think about flame, that, you know, kind of kills all the pathogens. You know, so what about aquamated remains? Well, they're 100% pathogen, disease-free, and they're safe to handle with your bare hands, just the way the cremated remains are, and if you want to. So here's some of the reasons that people might opt for this option versus going with a traditional cremation. They think of this as being a more gentle process. It certainly speaks to people because of the lessened environmental impact. It's a very low energy consumption. It's an estimated about 1/10, maybe 1/8 to 1/10 the carbon footprint of a flame-based cremation. So that certainly speaks to folks. Like I said, this is the mecca of irredeemable tree huggers. So people are always really interested to know, like, what can I do to make sure my death care is in keeping with my environmental values? And that's a great question. So this is becoming more and more available. I'm starting to think this map is getting kind of out of date. There's been a lot of changes in the last year. Things that are marked in green here, territories in green, are places where aquamation is legalized, and then blue is territories that we're considering them. I think we're up to about 20 states in the United States that have legalized this option, which is really exciting. And that's because of consumer advocacy. So I can never do a webinar without including this photo. I just love it. This is one of our community partners, Dion Strummer. He was one of the folks that was instrumental in getting aquamation legalized down in Oregon. And he was just so excited that he decided to model the machine to kind of give you an idea. He's a really goofy guy, and it's just kind of fun and lightens the mood a little. But, you know, sometimes I find that death is one of the things that can be the toughest to change people's minds. And I'm not here to convince you to make any one choice. The only right choice is an informed one. But I think one of the things that causes people to be a little bit wary of options like aquamation is they think like, that's some kind of like new hot millennial thing. It's really not. This is not a new or untried technology. It's been in use for decades. This is a really common way of handling the bodies that are donated to med schools. Some of the institutions down on the bottom are examples of schools that have been using this process for a long time. So I think the first place it was legalized was, I want to say about 20 years ago in Northern Europe. So this isn't a new untried thing. It's very safe. It's very energy efficient. And like I said, for a lot of folks, the idea of having your remains integrated into water is really spiritually meaningful. So it's something to consider, I imagine. for the price survey, this is the first year that we've been able to collect data about alkaline hydrolysis and about natural organic reduction, which we'll talk about later. So we know that almost 30% of Washington funeral homes are now offering this option. But again, doing a little comparison shopping is going to do you right. You can see that the prices are going to range from about $1,000 to almost $4,000. And the average is about $2,000. So depending on where you go, the same service can cost wildly different things. Okay, I'm gonna take a sip of tea real quick. Okay, so we're gonna talk about conventional burial for a second. So here are some of the most common questions that I get about a full body burial here in Washington. Unfortunately, if you kind of have this vision, like you spent your whole working life in Seattle and you bought a beautiful piece of land up in Bellingham and you thought, gosh, I can't wait to retire there and then spend the ultimate retirement on your land. Well, unfortunately in Washington, the only way that you can be buried on your own property is if you have your land zoned as a cemetery. This process, depending on your municipality, can be really easy. It could just be a couple of forms. But there are places in the state where this process can be very paperwork intensive and can cost a lot of money, like expect things with commas. So if this is something you've had your heart set on, it's really worth it to do the research up front, minimize the surprises for your family, and figure out what's necessary. So that's kind of a bit of a bummer for a lot of folks. That's their vision. There's other states where this is wildly different. I know in Arizona, gosh, I swear that they're very informal about it in a way that's a little disturbing. Like you can just bury wherever, but here in Washington, they're very specific about it. A really common misconception is that embalming is required by law. And I think there are some maybe less than ethical businesses that tiptoe to the edge of impropriety to make you think that's the case. And embalming is not required by law in any state in the United States. Full stop. There's a couple of diseases where embalming might be required or they might require you to cremate. But if your cause of death is Ebola, you're not going to be the one making decisions about the care of your loved one. The CDC is going to be heavily involved. So rest assured, this is unlikely to have any bearing on your care. So embalming, not required. If you want it, you go for it. You do your thing, but please only choose embalming if that's what you really want. Don't let a funeral home pressure you into something that doesn't resonate with you. I've included a photo here of Tahoma. This is one of our national cemeteries. It's just so beautiful. I mean, look at that view. Oh, what a place to spend eternity. I love it. National cemeteries are free for veterans with some caveats. If you're a veteran or someone you love is a veteran, go ahead and reach out to the VA now. I'm sure it's not news to you if you're a storied military veteran that you're going to be on hold for a while, and they've got lots and lots of rules. And so I think it behooves you to do the research up front and kind of get the heads up on that so that there's minimal surprises. Though the cemetery might be free, the plot that you're buried in or where your urn is buried might be free, you will still have to pay for the care of your body and the merchandise. So I mean, it's some savings, and there are some financial death benefits for veterans, but they tend to be a little on the complicated side. So reach out to them directly, because there's things like, if your cause of death is tied to your service, or if you die in a VA care facility, and like all these little things. So reach out to those folks directly to understand your benefits, and get started on the paperwork now, because good Lord, they take their time. Okay. So again, like I said, here in Washington, we're really kind of on the cutting edge of looking at the environmental impact of death care. It's one of my favorite subjects. I have whole webinars about it. In fact, I have a webinar series I do about this every year. So if this is something that interests you, you'll want to check out our YouTube channel or reach out to us at PMA. But when we think about what it means to have a green burial, we tend to think about it more as maybe having shades of green. There's not like an ultimate green burial. Here in Washington, we have a lot of great options, and it really depends on who you work with as to what they consider green. Generally, when we talk about a green burial, it means that your body hasn't been chemically embalmed. Your body might be placed in a biodegradable container, instead of a beautiful lacquered casket that's stained and got beautiful hardware on it. Maybe you've chosen simple pine, unfinished pine, or maybe you've chosen woven seagrass or something, maybe a shroud even. So there's some really great options there. A lot of times folks are placed directly in the ground. A conventional burial generally involves a cement box around your casket called a vault. A lot of times I've heard some misleading advertising saying that the vault is there to preserve you and to keep the bugs in the water out. But truthfully, and I wish they would just say this because it's not a big deal, you know, to take care of a big cemetery property, you need some industrial lawn equipment. I mean, you're not going to mow a cemetery with a little push mower. You're going to bring in the big guns to keep things beautiful. But as time goes by and our body breaks down and our casket breaks down, the land will sink. And so that's a really unsafe place to try and, you know, drive your lawnmower. So they put the concrete liners in there to hold the land in place so that it's safe to use lawn equipment on it. Well, it's not a big deal. I don't know why they're not honest about it, but some folks, they don't like the idea of being inside the concrete. I've heard of some folks, because of their religious tradition requiring them to be in contact with the soil, I've heard some really cool workarounds. Because here in Washington, we have less than 10 green cemeteries. I think it's maybe 6. And each of them kind of sets their own rules for what green looks like. And it's been my experience that a lot of cemeteries are willing to kind of meet you halfway. Like if they require the cement vault, but your faith requires you to be in contact with land. 2 interesting solutions I've seen where since the concrete vault is kind of like a shoebox, you know, they'll put soil inside there so that you can still be touching the soil, but still be in the concrete vault to meet their requirements for the cemetery. And then the other thing I've heard is called the butter dish method, you know, like a little lid on a butter dish. And so they can make your body in contact with the earth directly and then flip the vault over to kind of cover you like a butter dish, which is, you know, like I said, it's a great way to kind of meet them halfway. Everybody ends up with what they need. The only way you're going to know is if you ask. So if you do have some important religious practices or just things that are, you know, valuable and meaningful to you, you should talk to the business about it. They might be able to find a way to accommodate what you need. One interesting thing also is some green cemeteries, they won't let you put monuments. They'll either want rocks or different native plants instead of a marker. And so I've included a photo of one of the green cemeteries here in Washington, and it doesn't even look like a cemetery. It just looks like a little wooded area. Like, that's kind of nice. So here's a couple of examples of what those biodegradable containers might look like. And these are both handmade and they're really lovely. On the bottom right is a shroud that's handmade. This is a really popular product at quite a lot of funeral homes. And it's even got handles in it so that you can have your friends and family help lower your body into your grave, which is really lovely. You know, the one on the upper hand side is woven seagrass, really beautiful option as well. So here's a couple of essential things to remember about cemeteries. If you're here in Washington, I can't imagine it would surprise you to know that real estate challenges continue into eternity. When you purchase a plot in a cemetery, you're purchasing the right to burial. You don't own the land. So the cemetery as a private business gets to make the rules about how that land is used. In Washington, funeral homes and cemeteries are separate businesses. And so any funeral home can work with any cemetery. But like I said, since they're separate businesses, they get to make their own rules. So they can make decisions about how many people are in that plot. And that can even be something as simple as, you know, a lot of married couples can't really decide on what they want. And so one partner wants to be buried and one wants to be cremated. And so sometimes the person that wants to be buried with their partner's urn with them. And the cemetery can say no. They can say that's 2 people in one grave. Nope. Which is interesting. Like I said, they can require that cement vault. And also they can make rules about the size and the type of monument. I saw a kind of cheeky example pop up in the news recently of a cemetery that got really upset at a family that chose a monument that had a dirty word in it, which I'm sure did honor the memory of the deceased the way that, you know, they should have, but it wasn't in keeping with the aesthetic of the cemetery. And so, you know, I grew up in Arizona where it's really unusual to see vertical monuments because they just kind of mow the lawn year round. And so they want those flat ones so they can maintain the lawns. Some cemeteries, like especially VA cemeteries, have a very specific aesthetic. You know, they'll have rules down to the dimensions of your urn for your niche. So if you have your heart set on a specific cemetery, you're going to want to reach out to them in advance and figure out what the rules are. Again, it minimizes the surprises. And one thing that's a little frustrating is that cemeteries are not required to provide you a price list the way that funeral homes are. So again, it can be a little tricky to get information on that. So try and do what you can to do some planning ahead of time. And because gosh, trying to make these decisions at the last minute, when a loss has already happened is so hard, and it can be really tricky to get a hold of people and get the things you need done. So let's talk a little bit about natural organic reduction. This is another one of those newer options that we have here in Washington, and it's very exciting. You've maybe heard this called a couple of things, maybe recomposition or terramation. It's human composting, which is pretty fascinating. This process was invented back in 2017. The company that's now known as Recompose used to work under the name the Urban Death Project, and this was a collaboration between the Western Carolina University Forensic Anthropology Department, which, those are colloquially body farms where they study the way human bodies break down. And so those folks worked with Washington State University and a bunch of people that donated their bodies to this project to see what needed to be done. So we actually got this legalized back in 2019, and the first facility opened in Seattle at the end of 2020. So this is pretty fresh, and it's pretty interesting too. I think it's up to 5 states now that have legalized this option. And, if like me, you're one of those tree huggers, this is probably the option for you. Like, this is I hear all the time from folks that say, I just want to be a tree. As is, this is currently the closest option that you can get to that, if that speaks to you. So here's a couple of images so you can kind of wrap your mind around it. The upper left-hand side is an architectural drawing of the space at Recompose, and you can see their design is kind of like a honeycomb, and each of those little vessels is a body. Down on the bottom and on the right is the business called Return Home, and so our organization is partnered with both of these folks. That's why I have the photos, and you can see that their vessels are kind of long and rectangular. So I took the one photo shortly after they opened, and then the one on the right, now they have these sliding panels with this beautiful art that cover up the vessels. And so you can kind of slide the panel open to see the vessel where your loved one is. You can see on the image on the left, actually, some folks have decorated the vessels, and like they'll put a flag on the vessel that holds a veteran, things like that. So this is a pretty fascinating option. Again, this goes by a lot of names, and they're mostly brand names. And like I said, this is the first time we've been able to capture data about this because it only became available in 2020. And right now, about 20% of Washington funeral homes are offering this through 4 contracted providers around Washington. So there's some, unique space and technology requirements to offer this option. And so funeral homes have to partner with those other businesses to provide it. But this is one of those ones where it's really tricky to do sort of like an apples to apples comparison. We found prices ranging from just under $4,000 to $7,000. And if this is something that resonates with you, you're going to want to reach out to those businesses and kind of figure out what's included in this price, what's not, just to, again, minimize surprises and help you do financial planning. Because as I'm sure did not escape your attention, this is a little spendier of an option. In terms of the cost of death care, cremation remains the most affordable, then aquamation, then burial, and then depending, on the cost of a burial or natural organic reduction, those are going to be the most expensive options. So one thing that sometimes makes folks uncomfortable, but I'm finding that there's an increase in interest in the community, is home funerals. And so this is completely legal in Washington. Like I said, a funeral home doesn't have to be involved in your care. They can be as involved or not involved as you want. So maybe you just want them to take care of all that stupid paperwork so you can focus on all the meaningful ceremony and care. Or maybe you'd like the support to figure out how to wash and dress your loved one and, keep their body cool for a couple of days while people come to visit. If you just want to be the person that transports your loved one, that's an option as well. I know we supported a family, a couple of years ago now, I think, who their loved one had died in rural Montana, and he was just such an outdoorsman. They decided that they wanted to transport him themselves in his truck, and they were able to get some guidance on how to do that safely, and then they were able to take a path that was through some of his favorite areas and kind of take this like meaningful road trip with him to honor him, which is just really powerful. You can't replace an experience like that. So that's an option if it's something that speaks to you. Another really common thing that people are curious about is, how do I donate my body to science? Well, there's a lot of places you can donate it, but it's important to know that these organizations get to decide what that means. most folks donate to medical schools, and here in Washington we have a couple. We have the University of Washington, Washington State University, and I also think there's some smaller colleges like maybe Bastyr that accept donated, full body anatomical donations to train their students. So if that's something you're interested in, you have to reach out to them ahead of time. This can't be arranged after a person dies because they've got paperwork and they've got requirements. So if this is something that you've always really wanted to do, you're going to want to go ahead and figure out what the requirements are, because these programs generally won't take certain kinds of bodies. Like, if you're really, really tall, you won't be able to fit into their refrigeration, or, they won't take bodies that are over a certain size, again, for storage reasons. And there's certain causes of death that they won't want, they want your body to be predominantly intact. So I always encourage folks when this is their primary interest to come up with a plan B. If you die on an adventure trip, zip lining in South Africa, it's going to be a little tricky to get your body home in time for these, institutions to be able to benefit from the knowledge of your donation. So come up with a backup plan. What's an acceptable plan B? So in addition to medical schools, you can also donate to mortuary schools. Like here in Washington, we have Lake Washington Technical Institute, and that's where our funeral directors go to school. There's also some for-profit body donation programs, but truthfully, I don't know a lot about those. I keep meaning to learn more. One thing I would recommend, there's this really wonderful book by the science educator, Mary Roach, and it's called Stiff, The Curious Life of Cadavers, and it's all about what it means to donate your body to science. So, I'd say it's a very honest, unflinching look at it. So if maybe you have a weaker stomach, it might not be the read for you, but it's really fascinating. And I think can be a really useful tool to decide if that's the right choice for you. Okay. And in addition to full body donation, you can also donate your organs and your tissues. One thing that's important is a lot of times folks say, oh, I've got the little heart on my driver's license, I'm good. It's not enough. Here in the United States, we have this organization, Donate Life, and different parts of the country have their smaller affiliate. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we have an organization called Life Center Northwest. And if you want to donate any of your organs or tissues, you need to do so by registering with Life Center Northwest. And it's really interesting. You can have a surprising amount of say on what happens with your body. I talk to a lot of folks that are like, I think organ donation is a really beautiful thing. It's really interesting. I'd like to do it, but I just think it's kind of oogie to have my eyes touched. So I don't want to do it at all. Actually, you can write down exactly which organs or tissues you want to donate or what you don't want to donate. So if that's what's holding you back, I think it's worth, giving the paperwork a look and seeing if maybe there's a way to kind of, compromise on that. Because I hear from a lot of folks that it's the eyes that kind of makes them a little so certainly an interesting option. But whatever you decide to do, whether or not you decide to be a donor, talk about it with your family. That's kind of the theme for all of this, is it's no good for you to make decisions and keep them secret. If this is about your care, you need to make sure someone knows what you want, because by the time the care is necessary, you're not going to be able to advocate for what it is you want. So it's important to know that if you decide to become an organ or tissue donor, it doesn't affect anything about your care. You're not going to receive less medical care as a patient. It's not going to impact your death care, how your body is handled or treated. All of these organizations, hospitals and organ procurement and funeral homes, we're all used to working together. So don't worry about any of that. So it's just a lot of choices to make. And I know that can feel a little bit overwhelming. Kind of in the broadest sense, the things you're going to decide on is what kind of services you want for your body. Do you want to be embalmed? Do you want to be cosmetized? Do you want to be dressed in something special? Or do you just want really minimal handling? Is there special merchandise that you're going to need, like a casket or maybe an urn? One thing that I suggest to folks, and I think sometimes folks are a little confused by it, but two of the most common places to buy urns and caskets are Costco and Amazon. And the joke I always hear is, if I buy a casket at Costco, do I have to buy a pallet of them? No, you don't. A lot of folks really like to work with Costco because they have really excellent customer service. So certainly an option, a really great option for keeping costs minimal. They're very competitive. Amazon can be a great option for a variety of choices. A lot of times folks kind of see things in the funeral home and they think, gosh, that's just so buttoned up and formal. And, like if you're looking at, there's a really popular very basic urn. It's red and metal, very shiny. It's just very serious. And, you know, if your loved one, that's who they were, then that's a good fit. But gosh, for a lot of us, like, you're thinking like, oh my gosh, my dad was such a goofy guy, or my mom was so sweet. This doesn't feel like her. There's a lot of really good options, and you can purchase an urn or a casket anywhere and provide it to the funeral home, and they have to accept it. So, you know, if you're not seeing merchandise that feels right for you, don't settle. This is a big decision. You know, do a little comparison shopping. Again, this isn't an emergency. You have time to get your needs met. So one of the big parts of this whole process and getting your needs met is whether or not you're going to have a service. Are you going to have a funeral or a memorial or a celebration of life? And if you just want some interesting trivia, the only difference between a funeral and a memorial is whether or not there's a body there. You know, maybe you just don't want everybody making a big fuss, or maybe you want everybody to get together and have a barbecue and drink a beer in your memory. You don't want them to do anything too buttoned up, or maybe you want a full Catholic mass. Tell somebody, put it down in writing. You know, for a lot of us, we have religious and cultural traditions that we have to keep in mind when we're planning our death care. And, you know, sometimes if you live in an area where maybe your identity isn't well represented, you might have a little bit extra work to do to find practitioners that are familiar with it. You know, we've encountered quite a few, gosh, we have such a variety of folks here in Seattle. You know, there's different things about the way that your body is placed in a grave, which way you face, or the garments that you're wrapped in, or the way you're washed. You know, you might want to work with someone that's from your culture or familiar with your traditions. So that might take a little bit of research. And unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic continues and has certainly placed a damper on some of this process. As if it wasn't hard enough to go through a big loss, we certainly haven't been able to celebrate and mourn the ways that we're used to. So one thing that I think is, gosh, I want to word this carefully. There's absolutely no silver lining to COVID-19, but I am really happy to see the ways that we've used technology to kind of reach out and connect meaningfully. And we talk to so many folks who really love being able to do Zoom memorials. You know, like if it's not safe for you to travel, or you're in the hospital and you can't go, but you just, this is someone you love, this is such a wonderful way to connect. And so folks are, I think, starting to demand a greater variety in the way services are delivered to meet those needs. And I know this is the question that's kind of on your mind through the entire thing, and maybe you're too uncomfortable to ask, but that's okay. So who cuts the check? Who has to pay for all this? Well, your next of kin, or that designated agent if you've decided to, you know, document that instead of using your state decided next of kin. If you don't have one of those, well, your estate would pay for this. If there's just no money, no resources at all, each county here in Washington has a small amount of money set aside for what's called indigent cremation, but the funding is so small. Gosh, it's just criminal. And the need for the funding and for the support has only grown as funeral poverty has increased, and, you know, families are experiencing multiple losses, which is really just doubling down on the amount of debt. So it's not something you can really depend on. One thing that, you know, we're really gratified to be able to do at PMA is that we're able to provide some limited financial assistance to folks who contact us and, you know, do the paperwork for us. And that can help, but it's, I can't lie to you, it's really expensive to die. So it just really behooves you to put some thought into this ahead of time before it's a timely decision, so that you can start to plan for this. Because gosh, yeah, it's so expensive, and it's only going to get more expensive. So I know it sounds so weird, but gosh, you just really need to shop around and be a smart consumer. I mean, when you think about it, like, when was the last time you bought a refrigerator? You know, you didn't just like walk into Sears and see the first thing and just go, that's got doors, perfect, let's take it. No, you probably like looked through some ads, maybe talked to your friends, you waited for a big sale, you know, you thought about the things you hated about the last refrigerator and that you want to make sure it's the right dimensions and it matches your appliances. Maybe you had a spreadsheet. That's a pretty small purchase in comparison to the cost of your death care. So it's not gauche, it's not tacky, it's not inappropriate to take that same smart decision making and apply it to death care costs. We've just been socialized to think that it's wrong. But, you know, gosh, if you talk to the people you love in advance, they're always going to say, well, don't spend a ton of money and go into debt on my account. hear them, get something that respects what they want. So it's important to know that federal law, there's one federal law, and it does actually protect some of your rights as a consumer. And if you want to learn more about this, we have information on our website, and I can also certainly send you the text of the law if you'd like. But it kind of protects some of your fundamental rights as a consumer. Funeral homes have to give you a written and itemized price list if you come visit them. They have to give you a quote over the phone. One of the things we've been pushing really hard for gosh, I think over 20 years now, is we've been really pushing for this law to be updated to require funeral homes to put their prices on their website. So we've been tracking for, I think, about 20 years now, how many funeral homes provide that information on there. So right now we're up to 54% of Washington funeral homes that put their pricing information on their website. Nationally, it's less than 20%, I think. So when you're looking at this and you're like, only 54, that's terrible. This is pretty good compared to the rest of the country. But this is a big point of advocacy, is this information needs to be available. I mean, we're in an ongoing respiratory pandemic. You can't just drive around doing a little road trip to funeral homes to get this information. You need to be able to pull up their websites and, do this kind of stuff. So to that end, our price survey is a now searchable database hosted on our website, and I'll make sure that you have that information, and you can go ahead and kind of get an idea of what the costs are where you live to anticipate that. And it's really wild. You're going to see how much the cost varies from business to business for the exact same service. And so much of it's geography. We find that a lot of times people think like, oh, big cities, things are expensive. Well, a lot of the funeral homes along the I-5 corridor are actually quite a bit more affordable than funeral homes in Eastern Washington, just because of geography. If a person stops at a funeral home here in Seattle and they're like, that's crap, I don't want this place, the vibes are off, or they don't have what I want. You hop back in the car, you get on the freeway, you go down another exit, and you have more options. So those businesses are really closely competitive. But if you're somewhere like Yakima, or like, I don't know, Wakanda, or like one of those places up in super North Washington, there's not a lot of options up there. And so those businesses can set whatever prices they want because they know that you don't really have anywhere else to go. So this is really important information for you. And like I said, you're going to treat this purchase like any other purchase. You're going to want to look at price. You're going to want to look at quality. What's their reputation in the community? Who owns them? For some folks, it's super important that they work with, a small mom and pop kind of business. But there's an argument to be made for using a corporate funeral home, since things are very standardized and they're really well resourced, and maybe that makes them more affordable. And of course, you're going to need somewhere that can provide the types of care that you want. Not every funeral home offers natural organic reduction or alkaline hydrolysis, or not every funeral home is familiar with the requirements for the ways that a Muslim body needs to be washed and buried, so that can certainly govern who you work with. But at the end of the day, most funeral homes you choose based off location. Where did the death take place? Who's close by? And hear me, I really encourage you to use Yelp and Google. These are really valuable tools to get an idea of what other people's experiences are. Certainly take them with a grain of salt, because the only time we ever write a review is when we've got something to say. But you could learn a lot about a business this way. And one of the other questions that really lingers for folks is, gosh, this financial planning side of things is real stressful. Can I prepay? Well, you can. But, and again, we're an educational nonprofit. We don't have any opinions on what you should or shouldn't do, but it's important to know that for most people, when they're thinking about prepayment, what they're concerned about is locking a price in. But most funeral homes no longer will lock a price in. This was a really popular sales tactic in the 60s, maybe into the 80s, but it's pretty unusual. People live longer now, long, healthy lives. So if you are on it and you are newlywed and you and your partner decide you're going to go down and get everything sorted now and just let it go, you might live another 50 years and the economy might look very different. So funeral homes stand to lose a lot of money if they lock in a price now. So if you do see a funeral home that's guaranteeing a price, I would say go through that policy with a fine-tooth comb. It's not unusual to find a business who says, yeah, we'll lock the price in. But what they're doing is they're going to artificially inflate the cost on the front end to try and anticipate inflation. So if anything sounds too good to be true, there might be a reason. Like I said, treat this the way that you would as a consumer of anything else in life. The one time that it does make a lot of sense to prepay is if you need to do a spend down for Medicaid, and then an irrevocable prepayment totally makes sense. But one thing is that, it's not going to lock that price in, but also it takes that money out of your control. Those funds aren't as portable. Maybe if you prepay with a corporate owned funeral home that has a lot of locations and easily can transfer things between them, sure, that might work. But there's some other ways that you can be smart about your financial planning while still maintaining control over your money. It's not uncommon for folks to think like, oh gosh, these Seattle winters are getting terrible. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm moving to Phoenix. Well, if you want to do that, you want to know that you can take your money with you and make sure that your death care is funded. So there's a couple things you can do. You can set up a funeral trust account. You can set up a pay on death account, which is like a special savings account. Or you can set up a life insurance policy that pays out specifically for death care costs. So each of these options can help you with the financial planning side of things while retaining your control over your money. So these are things to talk about with your financial planner or your banking institution or your partner, your family. There's a lot of options out there. And it's really easy to just want the simplest thing, but that may not be the best fit for your finances or your family. So at the end of the day, at People's Memorial, we encourage you to think about what you want, talk about those wishes with your loved ones, even as kind of uncomfortable as that might be, and make sure you put it down in writing and do it today. It's never too early to do this. No one ever regrets planning things too far in advance. And once you do that, you can rest in peace. Okay, I love that one. I have to keep it. So let's see. We are at 2:05.
We have quite a few questions if you want to get going on those.
Well, if you do have to hop out, this is the contact information for us at People's Memorial. Reach out to us anytime. But I'm going to go ahead and try and tackle as many of these questions as I can. And like I said, if you need some time to chew on this stuff, no worries. I know it's kind of like trying to take a sip from a fire hose, and you might need some time to metabolize what you've learned today and think about what your question is. So please reach out to us at any time. And there's no question that's stupid or, we're not going to judge you. That's why we do what we do is, we're here as an educational resource. Not that that's a challenge. Don't sit at home kind of trying to come up with something gross just to mess with us, but, we just want to be a resource to you. So I do see that Emily dropped in the chat. There's a survey for today's session that we'd encourage you to fill out. I'm also going to include it in the follow-up email with the recording and the slides. So let's tackle these questions. 1 second. Oh, so many good things in here. Okay. So the first question is, what is the cost to bury ashes in a cemetery? I cannot say off the top. You're going to need to contact the cemetery that you want to work with, but you can absolutely bury ashes in a cemetery. They'll either require you to purchase a plot in the ground to do it, or there's also columbaria, which are, like these walls of these little niches that you can put an urn in. They can be really lovely. There's one at, I want to say Evergreen with Shelley, that's really beautiful and has a lot of stained glass or something like that. So you need to reach out to the specific cemetery. Oops. Okay. Someone wants to know about donating their body. How do I let people know that I want that? Well, there's not a way to indicate on your driver's license if you want to donate your whole body. If you want to donate your organs or tissues, you can designate that on your driver's license, but you do still need to register with Life Center Northwest to do the actual paperwork for it. If you want to donate your whole body, you need to contact the institution you want to donate to, because they're going to have some questions ahead of time, because they're not going to be able to accept a donation if you die from an infectious disease, or if you're in a car accident or something. You need to be in a certain condition for them to be able to reasonably use your body. So you'll need to reach out to them specifically, and they'll have some paperwork to fill out.
I think for that question, she may have actually been asking, how do I undo the donation of the body? I believe that she's talking about the organ donation on their driver's license.
So the designation on your driver's license for being an organ and tissue donor is not legally binding. It's just a kind of a flag so that people see your license and say, oh, this person has been interested in it in the past. It doesn't automatically trigger that. So that would be something that you could do with the Department of Motor Vehicles. Someone is curious about the price survey. So that is on our website. I can go ahead and include a link on the follow-up email so that you can visit it. We're working on getting the database updated with all the newest information because, like I said, this is hot off the presses. It's very exciting. It is a huge project. I think we had like 8 people working on it, and some of the funeral homes had to be contacted 4 times. It's a lot of work, and hopefully it'll be, a really useful tool to you all to save you the process of having to do all those phone calls, because I can't imagine trying to go through that when you've just lost somebody. There's no way. Let's see. Someone is curious about different bodies using aquamation or natural organic reductions, like if someone is overweight. So as far as I know, for natural organic reduction, I want to say that actually for both these processes, there is a weight limit, but it depends on the facility. I know for right now, because of the shape of the aquamation machine, they can't really accept bodies that are larger than 400 pounds, but I imagine that as this option becomes more popular, they are going to make machines that can accommodate more bodies. No one's ever asked me about the weight limit on natural organic reduction. I imagine it's something similar. So you'll want to reach out to the particular business that you're working with to see if there are any limitations. Like, I'm sure that's also the same. Like, if you're really tall, like, what do? You're not going to fit in the vessel. I'm sure they can help answer that question. Someone is curious about financial planning and are these accounts separate from your savings in the bank or maybe like your Merrill Lynch accounts? And so yes, this would be separate. If you do have a Merrill Lynch account, if you have access to that kind of financial planning, absolutely reach out to your financial planner about what the best way to do this is. Or you can set up a meeting with your bank, because you can absolutely set aside money specifically unrelated to the rest of your finances for this. And something like a pay on death account makes it so that that money can't really go anywhere else. It's kind of closed off into a small space. So absolutely, you can treat this as a completely separate entity from the rest of your finances. And what the best way to do that for your individual finances is hard to say. So reach out to your financial planner. They might have some good recommendations on how to do that. Okay, making good time on these. Okay. Is there a detailed sequential process checklist from death to completion of the funeral for each checklist item? Yes, I will include it in the follow-up email. Because I know there's a lot on here, and trying to remember all that is just an awful lot of work. But I know the Co-op Funeral Home developed a checklist document for the families they serve, and I found it really useful. So I'm sure they would be happy to share it with you all. And then someone is curious about us at PMA. So what do we do, and what's our relationship to the funeral home at the time of death? So at PMA, like I said, we're an education and advocacy nonprofit, and one of the things is that we are a membership organization. We offer tons of information for free to everyone, but for folks that become members of PMA, aside from supporting the work that we do, a lot of people join because we have contracted with a number of businesses here in Washington to offer pre-negotiated discounts on death care, and it can be a pretty substantial savings. And so in terms of the role that we play at the time of death, a lot of times people will contact us to say, so-and-so's died, what do I do now? And we can help them identify who their closest contracted funeral provider is, get them connected up, answer any questions they might have about the process, and just offer ourselves up as an educational resource. So if you have more questions about that, I'll make sure that you have our organizational contact information in there as well, and I'm happy to talk more about that. But I promised Emily I wouldn't try and sell you too much stuff during the presentation. I think we got all the questions, but if you still have anything lingering, please reach out to us anytime. Again, that's my job. Communications is all about answering questions. So what do you think, Emily?
Yeah, thank you so much, Beverly. This was a great presentation. I also did leave my information in the chat. You can always reach out to SPL if you have any questions, and we can always refer you to Beverly or try to answer them with our librarians as well. And thank you all for being here today. And we are just a little bit over, so I will think we're good to let you all go, but have a great rest of your day. And we appreciate you guys all coming.
Yeah, absolutely. And keep your eyes peeled over the next couple of days for the follow-up email with the recording and everything. And hopefully I'll see some of you next week at our estate planning session. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.